Nice to see you all here. I want to start by thanking Archives for being wonderful partners of the museum and let me come out and do this on Wyoming Statehood Day. It's very exciting. I'm used to pacing all around the room when I teach kids, and because of the camera, I am in a playpen about this big. So if you see me pacing in a very small circle, that's why. I'm in charge of all of our education programs at the museum. So usually that means teaching kiddos, but every once in a blue moon, I get to teach grown-ups like you. And so thanks for letting me come out and talk with you. Like Robin said, we're going to chat about the fur trade, the greater fur trade as a whole, how it revolved around the beaver, and then how that opened up the era of the mountain men, and end with talking a little bit about the mountain men. We'll do questions every few minutes if you have any questions. But other than that, as soon as my friends here get this going, no worries. Side note, if you have not been to the museum, it's catty corner to us right now. We're open Monday through Saturday, 9 to 4:30. We are completely free. We're free and awesome. I mean, what more do you want? You also we have over 80,000 objects of Wyoming's history from dinosaurs to present day in our permanent collection. And you can access the vast majority of those on our website as well, if you go to our online collection database. So you can just keyword search Barbies and come up with every Barbie in our collection and see pictures of them. So pretty cool stuff. I do want to call, we have a couple other museum professionals here as well. Ooh, that's kind of cool looking. We have Elizabeth Degrenier over here. She is our supervisor of programs and exhibits, in charge of every exhibit you see and all the programs have in the museum. And Jennifer Alexander is our supervisor of collections, in charge of the 80,000 piece collection. But oh, it looks like we're all bueno. We all good? Will someone hit the hide button for me? The little box there. There you go, lovely. Oh, and Nathan also works at the museum, but he is in charge of all the exhibits here at the Capitol. Nathan, sorry for ignoring you. Well, cool. So with that said, let's chat. When we think about the fur trade and we think about the, the leading up into the mountain men, there are two animals that played a bigger part in the fur trade than any other animal. And those are the two species of beavers we have in the world. Who can tell? I'm used to children, so there will be audience participation. Who can tell me what is one species of beaver we have in the world? I'll give you a hint. The answers are on the screen. Eurasian beaver and the North American beaver. So where does the North American beaver live? North America, and the Eurasian beaver lives in Europe and Asia. Yeah, absolutely. Now, they look really similar. If you just saw one at a zoo, you probably couldn't tell the difference between them. But they are more different than a horse and a donkey, because horses and donkeys can make mules. Although they're mutants that can't have their own babies, they can still at least make a mule. But the Eurasian beaver and the North American beaver can't. They have a different number of chromosomes. They can't interbreed. But they have similar lifestyles. If you look at the behind me, am I right in the way? I guess I'm where the camera is. It doesn't matter if I'm in the way or not. They live in aquatic areas, rivers and lakes and ponds and creeks. They have similar lifestyles of eating aquatic plants and twigs and the layer under bark. They build dams, they build lodges. And if you look at the bottom right photo, their babies are adorable. So I want to show you here one of the beavers we have in our permanent collection. Now, I will tell you that when we're done, you can come up and take a look at anything you want closer. Some of the things on my table are in our education collection, which are things that children are allowed to touch. Sometimes real artifacts, a lot of times replicas. Stuff from the early 1800s are probably replicas. The permanent collection are the things that we don't even touch without gloves on. The base is not included. I can touch the base, but I can't touch him. So if you come up afterwards, I'll let you know what you can touch and what you can't touch. But this is a beaver. You can see they're big. They are the second largest rodent in the world, the largest rodent in North America. Rodents, 9 critter, hello, Miller moth. 9 animals. Does anyone know the biggest rodent in the world? Kids always know this fact for some bizarre reason. Every child knows this. So anyone know the biggest, was that capybara? I don't know why people know it, but people know it. Capybara, yeah. Big rodents, they live in South America, like a giant beaver, but like a giant guinea pig is what it looks like. Giant guinea pig that, is friends with anacondas. But yeah, so they're really big. They have a lot of adaptations for this aquatic lifestyle, from webbed feet, the giant paddle tail, and special teeth. Now, and like I said, I know this is a distance. Come up and take a look afterwards. They have really awesome front teeth that have something special on them. Does anyone know what beavers have on their front teeth to let them chew through a tree? Iron. So not only do beaver teeth continually grow, just like any rodents, just always, but they're covered in iron, so they can literally bite through a tree. Now, but when it comes to the mountain men and the fur trade, the number one most important thing about them is their fur, which we will get into in much higher, more detail. Well, I'll get you, Miller. I'm not even a light source. Why does it want to be on me? But anyway, if you're watching from outside of Colorado, Wyoming, that's a Miller moth, and in the summer, they're everywhere. But yeah, so our story for the mountain man in Wyoming, Colorado, Utah in the early 1800s, to start that story, we have to go way back in time to the 1500s. We're going back before trains were invented, before cars, before, we discovered electricity, before peanut butter was invented, before indoor plumbing, before Mozart was born, and the piano was even invented. We're going back before Isaac Newton discovered gravity, back when most people thought the earth was flat. Now, there's still a few of those lunatics around, but most of us understand the earth is round at this point. So we're going way, way, way back in time to the 1500s. And our story of the mountain men here in the Rocky Mountains actually starts over in Europe and Asia with the fur trade, the beginning part of the fur trade. Now, beavers are part of the fur trade. Who can tell me what were the beavers turned into? The number one thing that really drove the fur trade? Yeah, hats, beaver hats. So the beaver hat craze really started in the 1500s. There is some evidence of beaver hats before that time. This is from Chaucer. Chaucer. I can't say the name now. I'll say Chaucer. There you go, from the Canterbury Tales. And this is, if you see, when he described the merchant upon his head a Flemish beaver hat. Most historians probably think that was a beaver skin hat, not a beaver felt hat, which is what historically the beaver hats were. This is going to be an all-hour thing, isn't it? Just being dive bombed by one Miller moth. But a lot of people think of beaver top hats, but the beaver hat actually came in a lot of different shapes over time. 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, the early 1800s, the beaver hat was a major fad for men all across Europe, Asia, and eventually North America. Now, when we talk about the beaver hat, we kind of got to talk about how it was made and how the beaver was turned into a hat. So if we start with this thing right here, a raccoon skin cap. You've all probably seen these old, was it David Crockett? David Crockett, there you go. This raccoon skin cap, this right here is its skin. A raccoon skin cap is the skin of a raccoon sewn into the shape of a hat. This one has some trade cloth on the inside. Replica, I wouldn't be touching my hands if it was a real artifact, I promise. Some trade cloth inside for warmth. But it is the fur of an animal sewn into the shape of a hat. What probably that Canterbury Tales merchant hat was. A beaver hat is different. So a beaver hat does not include the skin of the animal. It only includes the fur. So this is a close-up of a beaver skin. This is a much smaller beaver than this guy right here, but has really good skin. Like a lot of aquatic and non-aquatic animals, beavers have 2 layers of fur. When we're done with the program, I encourage you to come on up and you can feel this, and you can actually feel what it feels like. But they have a long fur on the outside called guard hairs. And then if you look underneath, there is this really, really, really thick inner fur. Now, this pelt has been pet by, I don't know, 10, 20,000 children. And so you can see some of the long hairs have fallen out. Do you guys see the wavy hairs in the picture there? So that's what you're looking at, is that very velvety underfur. Now, let's do a vote. Let's see how good you are at guessing, or maybe knowing. I want you to hold up one finger if you think the mountain or the hatters, the hat makers, wanted to use only those big long hairs for the hats. 2 fingers for both kinds of hair, or 3 fingers if you think they only use the short hair. What do you guys think? Everyone has to vote. It's okay to be wrong. It's not okay to be a coward. I hear someone voting online. And the answer is just a short hair. Just a short hair. So what a hat maker would need to do is they would, once they got a pelt from a fur company, they would literally pull off every single long hair until it was nothing but the short fur. And then they would shave that into a big vat. If you look at this fur, those, I know it's dark in here, come up, look afterwards. But those of you with good eyes, can you see a difference in these 2 pelts? This one has had the fur plucked and a little bit shaved too. So you're only looking at the inner fur. And it just looks completely different. And the hatters only wanted the thick fur, the thick, velvety underfur. So what they would do is once they pulled out the long ones, they would shave that into a big vat. Now, I'm not going to go super in depth in the process of making hats. This is a very high overload. You're not going to be able to go home and make your own beaver hats after my conversation. But they would mix different chemicals in there, and they would mix it up till it basically was one big hairball. And they would pull that out, and can you see them rolling out like rolling pins and flattening it? They were turning giant, basically hairballs into pieces of felt. Now, felt today is basically made out of polyester, fake plastic strands. This is not historic. This is a 29-piece set of felt from Hobby Lobby. But they would turn this pile up thicker, thicker, thicker until they got big pieces of felt. And with that, they would steam and shape over molds until it stretched and formed into the shape of one of these beaver hats. Now, just last month, we got into the education collection. There's already one on display in the museum permanent collection, but we got an actual beaver hair, early 1800s beaver hat. I would like to show that to you now. So give me 1 second, I get my gloves. And yes, this is in the education collection, but because it's so old and precious, I'm still choosing to wear gloves with it. We don't let children touch everything in the education collection. Am I on camera over here? So what you're looking at here is is the carrying case that came with. This is an early 1800s, about 1820 to 30, beaver hat. We're going to talk about how much they cost here in a second and stuff like that. But if we open this up, this is a real early 1800s beaver hat made out of beaver felt. I encourage you to come take a closer look at it when the program's over. It still has the insignia for where in London it was made, even the street address for the company that made it. It's pretty amazing. I think this is really awesome. The other thing I love is look at the velvet on the inside. Like, isn't that fantastic for 200 years old? Yeah. So they would basically take hairballs and roll them out until they turned to felt, and then stretch it and steam it until it turned into this hat that would last, over 200 years. Now, interesting enough, in the 1700s, they started adding something to the mixture they'd never added before: mercury. Now, you know, mercury is incredibly deadly. It causes mercury poisoning, where the hat makers would start shaking. They become emotionally and mentally unstable, start hallucinating. They would basically go crazy. What character from books, movies, cartoons, TV shows do you all know that depicts a hat maker going through mercury poisoning? The Mad Hatter. So he was originally written as basically what you would see walking down the streets of London or another European city, these hatters who had gone completely insane, basically, from all the mercury poisoning. They would start shaking so bad their family would have to feed them because they couldn't hold silverware anymore. But these hats were super duper expensive. You know, the richest, fanciest men in Europe and Asia wore these hats, kings and princes and dukes and all that stuff. So all the other rich, fancy people wanted these hats. If you were a skilled laborer, someone who worked for a living, but it took skill to do what you do, blacksmith, tailor, something like that, it would take you 6 days of work to buy one hat. I mean, imagine if a quarter of your monthly income went to buy one hat. If you were an unskilled laborer, someone who just worked for a living, it would be 6 weeks of work without buying food or anything else, just all your money saved to buy one hat. So poor people didn't have these. The rich, fancy people had them, and then middle-class people would save up and buy them, but then they would be passed down to their sons and stuff like that. They became cherished objects, which is one of the reasons we have them in museums today, because, you know, they were so expensive, people took care of them. You know, random straw hats and stuff, a lot harder to find, you know. But across Europe and Asia, people are trapping beavers, killing beavers, and turning them into hats. So what do you think happened to the population of the Eurasian beaver? Started plummeting. So this map shows you, the blue, shows you every country that would have historically had populations of Eurasian beavers. And I want to be very clear, it does not mean everywhere that's blue had beavers. So for example, if you look at China, which if you don't know where China is, whoop, there it is. The beaver were only in the northern part of China, not in the southern part. But when I made this map, I just colored the entire, it was easier just to click on the whole country. So you'll have to forgive me. But this is where beavers lived, basically. But by the end of the 1500s, they were gone from the Middle East, because they used to be in Europe, Iran, Iraq, Syria, a little bit of Afghanistan. They were gone from the Middle East. They disappeared from Spain, Portugal, Italy, Scotland, England, and Ireland. And they were disappearing from a lot of other places as well. By the end of the 1700s, they were gone from these countries, and they were incredibly rare in the other countries. By the end of the 1800s, they were mostly gone from their entire range. This map shows you where beavers existed in the end of the 1800s. There was only 1,199 of them left. 1190. So you can see that France had 30. Germany had 200. Norway had 100. Belarus and Ukraine had a total of 290. There were 20 of them over in Eastern Russia. And then what's not on the map, there were 500 of them in 3 places total, in Siberia and China, but almost gone. So the beaver hat craze caused an almost extinction of the Eurasian beaver. But we know our story needs to get over to North America, because we got type of mountain men. So let's go across the Atlantic. You know, the early 1500s, same time period. What was happening over here? Well, in 1492, Columbus got lost and found someone else's house. And at that point, the colonies start popping up around what's now Canada and the edge of what's now the United States. You know, the Europeans invaded into native land, pushed native people west, and set up colonies. We're not going to go over Jamestown, Roanoke, Pilgrims, all that. You guys know that the 13 colonies existed. You know, we're not going to, in 1 hour, I'm not going to give you the entire history of early American settlements. But what animal do you think they found when they got over to North America? Beavers. And they realized they could make money by sending beaver skins over to Europe. And so the fur trade didn't leave Europe and Asia, but it moved over here as well and started trapping them here. Up in what we had French up in what's now like the Quebec area, English all down through the 13 colonies. So European people were kind of all over the place trapping. Now, who do you think was actually doing that trapping early on? The native people. The immigrants coming from Europe did not know how to trap. The beaver trap didn't exist yet. They didn't know how to trap beavers. And so the native people, the indigenous people of our continent, especially over here in the east and the north, those were the people trapping the beavers. So then how did the European immigrants in the colonies, how did they end up with the beavers? Trade. So trade has as long as there's been people in North America, and I mean people, not just European people, as long as there have been people in North America, trade's been a part of our story. You can trace the obsidian trade from Pleistocene people, at the end of the Ice Age, from Yellowstone all across the continent. But trade was also important when it came to the European people living in the colonies or up in Canada and the native people. So the native people would do the trappings and trade with the European immigrants for things they needed. Now, the first permanent trading fort was, I always forget if it's Chaplain or Chaplain. He was French, so I'm assuming it's Chaplain. But I don't know, maybe call him whatever you want. He's been dead, he doesn't care. But he was a French trader, and he set up the first trading fort, the first permanent trading fort, the first permanent European trading fort in the continent. And indigenous people, what they call up in Canada the First Peoples, because the trading fort was now in what's now Canada, could trade for things they wanted. So what are some materials you guys think trade items were historically made out of? The stuff the European people would give to the indigenous Americans. Yeah, so metal, things made of metal. So indigenous people, of course, throughout time, different weapons and tools for hunting. But during this time, bows and arrows were pretty common. And they would have made stone bow and arrowheads and stone arrowheads and bone arrowheads, along with spearheads as well, because hunting bison, especially in the plains, we're not quite to the plains yet here. But one of the major trade items that they would bring would be iron, or eventually other metal arrowheads. This was a popular trade item because it was much easier to trade for one of these guys than sit there and create your own arrowhead. So metal items, other things like pots and pans. What's this? Bell, hawk bell. Initially, they're called hawk bells because over in Europe, they were used for falconry onto falcons' legs. But they became very popular for trade items here in the Americas, for native clothing, native hair, very popular trade items. Also, little trade medallions. These are pewter, but historically silver was more popular. These are replicas. Children do touch these, so don't lick them. You'll get all sorts of weird diseases because children are dirty. But yeah, so little trade medallions for decorating clothing, decorating jewelry, or even stuff like hair. Trade medallions were another great metal trade item. Once again, all these will be up here afterwards if you want to come take a closer look. What's another material trade items we made out of? Glass and cloth. We got both of them. Yes, let's do glass first. So glass was another popular trade item. If you come over we have native objects in the museum in different places. The main native gallery is in the second floor, top of the stairs or top of the elevator. And you can see a lot of really amazing beadwork items from, Great Plains culture time all the way up to today. We have a beaded SpongeBob SquarePants beret you can take a look at. Because native artwork didn't stop. It's continued through today. But beads were a very popular trade item. Before beads, quill work was really popular, made out of porcupine quills. But glass beads became really popular. Beads came in all different shapes and sizes. These are seed beads, pony beads, check beads. This is a replica of the trade beads that Lewis and Clark brought on their expedition. These aren't actually, all beads weren't glass. These aren't glass, but glass beads were very popular. Along with glass beads were glass Mirrors. Native people had never had mirrors before. They weren't all glass for mirrors. Some were polished metal, but glass mirrors were another popular trade item. And then, of course, cloth. While some native people across the continent did work plant fibers into cloth, for a lot of the native population, especially here in the Great Plains and stuff here where we are right now, they used much more hides and even the basin people. And so cloth was a popular trade item. Like what famous blanket is this? Yeah, it's a baby blanket. This is a modern one, not 1800s, sorry. But yeah, trade blankets were a really popular trade item, but also it could have been like a cotton as well. Cotton cloth was another popular trade item. So this trading for it does really well. And then a few years later, this guy becomes King of England. By the way, does he win the award for I think he wins the award for the weirdest dressed human. Rich people are so weird. Like, put on as many clothes as you can on the top of me and make sure you show off my little skinny legs. And then I'm gonna hold a giant stick and a weird ball in the photo for some reason, or the picture for some reason. But anyway, he wanted England to get in the game. And so he gave all the land, the tributaries that flowed in the Hudson Bay to one company. What company was that? The Hudson Bay Company. That was 1670. Now, that's not the only fur company. You have no chance of reading this from your seats, by the way. So I'm sorry. But a little timeline, you can see the far left one are not actually companies, just all the French voyagers and trappers in the early 1600s. This one in the middle, the third one from the left, that's the Hudson Bay Company. And then if you jump over to the 1800s, well, late 1700s, early 1800s, that's when like the American companies, post-Revolutionary War, when those companies start showing up here. But it wasn't just the Hudson Bay Company. We had the Rocky Mountain Fur Company, the Ashley Fur Company, the American Fur Company. And a lot of these companies changed names and bought each other and sold, and kind of a weird little, history of these companies. But there were a lot of other companies, not just the Hudson Bay Company. So if all these people are trapping all across the colonies, northern continent where Canada is, what happened to those animals? They started disappearing. As a general rule, when it comes to North America and the beaver conservation, wherever the European people walked, the beavers disappeared. They didn't do a very good job like being ecological about they would just trap everything, leave nothing left to reproduce. Yes, sir. Good question. They mainly, he asked that be in the general rule, they trap them in spring and fall. The winter, they try to survive, and summer was time to party at rendezvous. Now, that's a mountain man question, which we're not quite to yet, but yeah. They were in fall after they got their thick winter fur, and in the spring before they shed. Yeah, good question. Thank you for the clarification. So we go forward a little bit. 1776, we declare our independence. 4th of July, fireworks, hot dogs, hooray. And we fight a war. By 1783, the U.S. went up to the Mississippi River. Elizabeth, I'm colorblind. I always forget. What are the two colors for the U.S. here? That one and that one. What are those? Purple and pink for all of you watching at home because you can't see my clicker. And the pink goes up through the Mississippi River. And that's what we went up through. Now, we did not have a little bit of the Upper Peninsula. We did not have the hat of Michigan or of Maine, and we did not have Florida yet. That still belonged to Spain. But that's all we had. That was after the war with Britain. That's all the U.S. was. Well, 20 years later, in 1803, we bought a bunch of land from Napoleon. What was that called? Absolutely, the purchase. You guys remember? You remember in 5th grade, 4th grade? Good job. So we bought all that middle section from France. Now, let's be very clear. Did the native populations of that land give France permission to sell their land to the U.S.? No.
So let's be very clear here, because we're talking from like a European standpoint here, but those people have been living there for thousands of years, not give a European country permission to sell their land. And I will say, to France's credit, they made the U.S. promise to uphold all of France's treaties with the native people. But U.S. history, we don't have a great track record of upholding native treaties. And so pretty soon we would fall back on that. But we were like, well, what's in all this land, you know? So who do we send into that land to figure out what was there? Lewis and Clark, yeah, and the Lewis and Clark expedition. Now, I do like showing off Wyoming here. One of my favorite things about Wyoming is over thousands of years, many different native tribes called this land home. But when it comes to European powers, like, look who used to own us. Wyoming used to be part of Mexico. Wyoming used to be part of New Spain. Wyoming used to be part of France. Wyoming used to be part of England. And Wyoming used to be a part of Texas. So Texas history is Wyoming history. French history is Wyoming history. And Mexican history is Wyoming history. Pretty cool, you know? But Lewis and Clark, they were trying to find a way to take the Missouri River all the way from the Mississippi River to the Pacific. What's the number one problem with that? Yeah, which means, yeah, and the river doesn't go there. If you look here, it stopped, the river, or more accurate to say, it starts in the Rockies. And so, like, we didn't know that yet. The country didn't know that, so they sent them out. But what animal did they find everywhere? Beavers. Yeah, well, bison too. Yes, we got to go into the plains, absolutely. And bison becomes super important in the fur trade once the beaver falls apart. So this is what brings us. Lewis and Clark, you know, we're talking 1804 to 1806. They start riding back to the U.S., to the cities. Beavers everywhere, you know, all these different critters. So these fur companies, Hudson Bay Company, Rocky Mountain Fur Company, Ashley Fur Company, you know, they start hiring men, the mountain men, and sending them into the Louisiana Purchase land, the Rockies, to trap. That's what the era of the mountain men is. It's the last 30 years of a 300-year fur trade. So I want to talk with the mountain men. Well, I'll pause for quick questions you'll ask me now before we jump into some mountain man stuff. Okay, if not, just offering. Cool. So I want to talk about who the mountain men were, and then we'll talk about how they trap beavers. We're not going to be able to talk all about their life, but let's talk about some things that some of us grown-ups get wrong about the mountain men. Let's first start with how old the mountain men were. I'm 44 years old, January 6, 1981. I'm an Atari baby. I want you to give me one finger if you think the mountain men were much older. The average mountain man was much older than me. 2 fingers if you think they're about my age, or 3 fingers if you think the average mountain man was much younger than me. What do you ladies think? We'll take a wild guess. Older, okay. Well, the answer is much younger. It is more accurate to call them mountain boys than mountain men. So some of these men, Kit Carson, now he wasn't a mountain man first. First he went with Lewis and Clark, but he was like 15 years old or something when he went out with them. Jim Bridger was 17, maybe 18. There was a lot of these boys who would still be like sophomores, juniors, or seniors in high school today, but they're running amok through the mountains. A lot of them were in their 20s, and 18 to early 20s. A ton of them would be like college kid aged. Imagine just arming a bunch of high school kids and college kids and sending them into the mountains. Go, kill things. Now, there were some older cats. James Beckworth was a very famous older mountain man, one of the most famous black mountain men, and he was an older cat. And some of them stayed out there for some years and got a little older, but a lot of these were really mountain boys. I would say the average age is significantly younger than me. Teens, 20, some in their 30s and older, but a lot of them were mountain boys. Now, the other thing that sometimes we don't know, that us grown-ups don't recognize about mountain men, is that this was one of the most diverse moments in Wyoming's history. We had men from now I will say, I'm saying men because they were all men, There were women who went into the mountains, like missionaries, Narcissa Whitman, who went with Marcus Whitman and stuff. But when it comes to fur trade, the fur companies did not hire women to go be trappers. We know there are Native women who were out there trapping for generations, but the fur companies did not hire women to be trappers. But they hired men from all different nations. Just here in North America, you know, the United States was represented, obviously, a ton of the mountain men from the US, both black and white and other races. There were mountain men from New Spain and Mexico. Now, Mexico declared their independence in 1810, 1811, 1810, I think, and they were fully independent by 1821. So depending on what part of the mountain man era you're talking about, maybe New Spain or Mexico, but there were a ton of them coming up. France had given away all of their North American Canadian provinces to Britain by 1763 or something. So it was just Canada then, but the French Canadian trappers were very different than the British. I mean, if you ever been to Quebec, they're still different, right? Quebec is different than the rest of Canada. But they were very different. So even though New France didn't exist, there were different culture of trappers. When it comes to Europe, we had mountain men from England, from Scotland, from France, from Spain, Ireland, Germany, and Switzerland, only a few from Switzerland. If you come to our museum, we have a couple little mountain men exhibits, and you can see a fencing foil that was found at one of the rendezvous digs here that we think was probably from Scottish make. And then there were also native mountain men. I mean, actual native men hired by the fur companies. A lot of tribes worked with the fur companies, trading and stuff. But some of the eastern tribes, like the Iroquois in Delaware, they were hired by the fur companies and sent out into the mountains. Some of the local tribes, like the Salish, the Crow, the Shoshone, they were hired. Some of those men were hired and got salaries from the fur companies. And then, of course, the Métis people from up in Canada and other indigenous First peoples as well. So a lot of different nations were coming, different languages were spoken, different religions, a lot of different diversity within mountain men, which is pretty exciting. Now, the social structure is another thing that sometimes us grown-ups get wrong about the mountain men. What either currently or before you retired, who wants to tell me one company or organization you worked for? The government, great. State, federal, what? State, Wyoming? Awesome. State of Wyoming. I want two more. I'm not going forward till I get two more. AT&T Public Schools, great. Which school district? Lovely. So, like, my dad worked for a bunch of computer companies before he retired. IBM, Sequent Computer, stuff like that. My mom worked for a bunch of different real estate companies. So, when you think about the mountain men, most of them worked for companies. Hollywood will show you, oh, these dudes out living by themselves, you know, trapping things, living all but. That's not what it was for most of them. They were in groups of 30, 50, or 100 people sent by a company, paid a salary to trap beavers. Now, they would break into smaller and smaller groups, down to like a pair, to go trap a certain creek or tributary. But then would go back to camp. These companies hired these men and sent them out. Like I said, Hudson Bay Company, American Fur Company, Rocky Mountain Fur Company, Ashley Fur Company. And so these were men who worked for companies. And they had a concrete social structure. The lowest were, I'm not going to try the French pronunciation. You can't pay me enough to butcher that. But the pork eaters. These were mountain men paid by the company who never even trapped beavers. They stayed in camp, tending to the livestock, making food, setting up tents, stuff like that. They never really even did any beaver hunting. These are the greenhorns, you know? And then you get to two levels of the hired men. The lower level, they got a salary and a part or all their supplies paid for by their company. And their company said, okay, Johnny, you go out to the mountains, we'll give you a salary, but every single beaver you trap, you have to sell to us no matter what we are paying. So do you think their companies ripped them off? Oh, corporate greed. We've never heard of that before, right? So yeah, their own companies ripped them off, but they were not allowed to sell to any company besides their own. Now, the higher level of hired men, they had a contract that said, okay, your salary, a portion or all of your supplies, and then you have a quota. You have to sell us a certain amount of beavers. But any beavers you trap over that amount, you can sell to anyone you want, whoever gives the highest bidding. Selling at, what's the big party? Rendezvous, yeah. There was, however, the free trapper. This is the Hollywood trapper. These people did exist. They were the exception to the rule, not the rule. But they didn't work for a company. They could be by themselves, go hang out with whoever they want. But if the market crashed, they weren't really getting a salary. They were just whatever they could trap and sell with their beavers. This would be, in today's terms, the people who were self-employed. You know, you don't have as much of a safety net when you're in charge of your own paycheck. Yeah. So we're gonna kind of two things here. We're gonna talk about how the mountain men trap beavers, and then we're going to close up with what happened to the mountain men after the fur trade. Yes, sir. As a general rule, since they spend most of the time underwater, the trap was a predominant primary way of killing beavers. So not shooting. Also, gunpowder was more expensive. I don't know. I mean, if you damage the skin and stuff, it's probably worth less because you have less of the fur and stuff. But it probably wasn't that big of a deal. But I don't know specifically on that question. Very good question. I don't want to randomly tell you something that I'm not sure of. So let's talk about the beaver trap. I brought a couple items from a permanent collection up here, one of which is an actual beaver trap from the mountain man era. So this is an early 1800s beaver trap, a leg hold trap. And when it'll be up here, you can't touch this one, but you can come up and look at it afterwards. Double spring traps means you would step on these two pieces, and then what would happen to the middle? It opens up, yeah. And then there's a pressure plate here to step on. The picture there is from our online collection database, where if you look up this item right here, that's its picture from our online database. You'll notice there's a long chain and a circle on the end. We'll talk more about that here in a second. But I'm gonna get out my education one now so I can manhandle it a little bit easier. So here's my education one. We don't know exactly how old this one is. I let kids touch it. It's been soldered shut so they can't lose a finger. It's also missing into their rope. But they would step on these, drop these down, and this would open up. Now, beavers live in the water, so where do they set traps? The water. By the way, the first leg hold trap, who has a guess what animal was the first leg hold trap used to trap? Good hypothesis. Nope, it's the only primate in Europe. Things with thumbs. No, good guess. There are 30 of them or so in this room. Humans. The first leg hold traps were used by rich people to trap poor people who were poaching their lives, their wild animals. But they quickly found they could make them smaller and use them for beavers. So they would set this underwater. Now, when an animal steps on this part, it closes around their foot. That's leg hold trap. But they had to bait these traps. Beavers have a scent gland in their rear end, near their rear end, on their hind end, I should say. And it's really, really stinky, called castoreum. And the mountain man would squeeze that gland into a little handmade wooden bottle, and they would mix some stuff with it. They could mix like a little bit of alcohol or nutmeg or different spices. They all had their own secret recipe for beaver attractant, and they were all sure theirs was the best. But they would mix that up, and they would take a stick and they would stick it in the scent and then stick it out in the mud. This is only under about a foot of water. And they would stick that smelly stick right above the trap. So the beaver was like, who's in my pond? And went to go investigate, step on the trap, close around their leg. Now, if you remember, I showed you that long chain. They would drag that chain towards the deeper water. And they would put a big stake through that circle. They would usually use, replicate again, usually use their hatchet to hammer that in, because they weren't going to carry around mallets. Use what you got. I mean, I've definitely used weird things for hammers when I don't have one. I think I put a picture up in my house one time with a shoe as a hammer. But they would just use their mallet, their hatchets. Now, then they left. They left this tributary, their stream, and they waited. They would have to then come back to collect the dead beaver. You guys see the ring? Oh, so quick thing about these pictures. The color photos you've been seeing and this black and white one you see here, these are not photos from the 1800s. I want to be very clear here so you're not tricking anyone. These are living history photos of the American mountain men. They don't like the term reenactor because they actually go out and live like mountain men. They make their own sinew sewn clothing, their own, like they were legit living history men. And it is at this point, camping for me involves a camper. I'm not going out with a lean-to with sinew sewn leather clothes as my only thing to stay warm. But these guys do that. So these are photos of living history American mountain men. But do you see the chain going to the pole there? That's kind of like what that stake would look like. So they would go and collect the dead beaver. After that, they need to skin it. This right here is a skinning knife, once again, a replica. But they were mainly curved blades. A lot of their scabbards and sheaths would be decorated with like little what's the word I'm looking for? Rivets and stuff like that. But the curved blade was how they would use to skin the beaver. During the spring and fall, when they were trapping beavers, they would eat the beavers. Anyone who's eating a beaver today usually says it tastes terrible, but they had a terrible diet and really ate whatever they could. But they would use this is a Green River knife. Green River knives popped up at the very, 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 very end of the mountain man time. But skinning knives have been used throughout the whole time. A lot of the skinning knives we have like in our permanent collection, they've been used so much. They have like this tiny little wafer of a blade left, just this tiny little piece, because they just wore down over time because they were used so much. Now, once they skinned it, they needed to stretch it. This is a beaver stretcher. We do have one historic beaver stretcher in our permanent collection. Right now it's on display at Fort Bridger, but this is a replica one. They would use willow or cottonwood or other soft woods to make the frame and basically stretch the beaver out and dry it. Now, occasionally they would treat the beaver skin. We don't, out of everything they wrote about, they very detailed about sewing back on Jedediah Smith's ear in journals after he was attacked by a bear. Very good details about some things, and yet not a lot about, the process of skinning and stuff like that, because it was just so ubiquitous. It'd be like us writing about starting a car in your journal, in your diary, probably not what you were writing about every day. We do believe that sometimes they probably tanned them, but it was probably rare. Most of the times it was just probably dried to be like a rawhide. Because once again, they weren't worried about the skin. They just wanted not to rot. That's what they really wanted. Now, this is from Museum of the Mountain Men. If you've not been to the Museum of the Mountain Men in Pinedale, it is phenomenal. The drive's not bad either. I highly recommend the Museum of the Mountain Man in Pinedale for your summer bucket list. Don't try to go in the middle of winter, I would recommend. But actually, I think they're closed in winter. So yeah, go in the summer. They would basically put about 100 pounds of beavers, about 66 beavers normally, wrap them in fabric and squish them into packs. Now, if you're trapping beavers in the fall, you're not going to rendezvous to the next summer. So if you have packs and packs and packs, 100 pounds each, full of beavers, what in the heck do you do with it? Okay. You pretend like you're a pirate burying treasure, and you bury them under the ground. These are called caches. And they would, this, once again, Museum of the Mountain Man, that's one of their displays you see there, that picture. They would wrap them up in trade cloth or some other fabric and bury them underground. These were deep holes that had a narrow opening, and then they got wider towards the bottom so they could line them with sticks, normally near a river so they could find them, but not so close it might flood. And you have to like camouflage the top. I mean, there's probably still beaver caches out across Wyoming that people never went back and found, just waiting to be found. There's no way every single cache has been found because they were hiding them all over the place. Also, numerous journals talk about men getting buried alive and killed inside these caches. There's one I tell the fourth graders. It talks about like, we believed him to have been instantly killed, knew the cache should be destroyed, and therefore left it. Like they didn't even try to dig their friend out. They're like, oh, too much work. He's dead. And then they would continue trapping throughout the year until summer came, when they would dig it. Black and white photo, still reenactors. You can tell because the guy is picking his teeth with a gun. But this is from the Fort Laramie yearly rendezvous. But they would come to rendezvous, and that's where their company would bring out supplies. And sometimes these rendezvous were 1 week long. Sometimes they were almost 2 months long of boozing and partying and marrying and shooting and fighting. Yeah. They would get all their money the first couple of days and then spend it before rendezvous was over. Yeah. So what I want to end you with, here's some other critters for the fur trade, is end you with kind of what happened here to end the fur trade and what happened to the mountain men. So beavers are disappearing everywhere. And in the about 1840, this guy, Prince Albert, married to Queen Victoria. In England, when you marry a queen, you are not a king, you're just a prince. He did something insane, something wild, like unimaginable in Victorian England. He started wearing silk hats instead of beaver hats. So all the other rich, fancy people wanted to be like Prince Albert. And almost overnight, people started buying silk hats instead of beaver hats. So the hatters were no longer selling beaver hats. So they stopped buying beaver pelts from the fur companies. And when the fur companies stopped selling their pelts, they fired their mountain men. And by 1840, the era of the mountain men and basically the era of the fur trade had come to an end. All collapsed because of one, I'm oversimplifying, but one dude in a silk hat. Now, the mountain men went on to do different things. Some of them, Jim Bridger, ran trading forts for the Oregon Trail, turned their mountain men trading forts into Oregon Trail trading forts. Some mountain men became guides to lead, because the moment mountain men era ends, the Oregon Trail begins. 1840 to 1860 is Oregon Trail. And so some became guides, some became scouts, and would end up fighting in the frontier wars, fighting against the same tribes they had married women from and stayed with over the winters. Some of them just settled down with their wives and just lived the rest of their life, just chilled. But the era of the mountain men and the fur trade in North America had a drastic effect on the population of beaver here too. So it is estimated before the European people first invaded North America, we had about 100 to 200 million beavers, North American beavers on our continent. These are tiny little beads, tiny beads. If every single bead represents 2,000 beavers, this is a number, this is just 100 million beavers that we had in North America. By the end of the mountain man era, the estimate for North American beavers in North America was 100,000. That's this right here. That is 50 beads. Now, since that era, the beavers didn't, neither beaver went extinct. The Eurasian beaver is on the rebound. Ours have rebounded. We are now at between 10 and 15 million beavers. As this number right here. Once again, each bead still represents 2,000 beavers. Now, I 100% agree this is better than this, right? But we'll probably never get to this again. Lewis and Clark described a patchwork of beaver ponds across the continent, full of fish and wildlife and birds. And due to just the way our country is now, we'll probably never have a patchwork of beaver ponds across the continent. But we're blessed that they didn't go extinct, you know? So that's kind of the end of my chat. How are you on time? How late am I? I feel like I'm way late. Oh, it's like I've done it before, y'all. So I'd be very happy to take any questions you guys have. And if there's any question in the chat, please let me know. Anyone have a question they want to ask about any? Yes, sir. Wait, oh, sorry, one more time, repeat for me. Oh, it was called keratin, and it made it more, if I remember right, ask my friend Google to make sure I remember this right. But it made it easier to work with. I think it was more pliable is what it was. So it was easier to steam, if I remember right, the reason they did it. Something about the process was easier. And they just decided money was worth more than their health, I guess. I can't imagine they didn't notice. Good question. I don't know the exact order of operations there. But I can't imagine they wouldn't. Like, something's going wrong, stop what we're doing and figure it out, you know? Because I will tell you, in the US, mercury was still added. Hatters were still using mercury up until the early 1900s. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm not sure exactly when they put it together, but yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah, a lot tougher than I am. A lot of them wore leggings, so they would wear a breech cloth. Not all of them. They had different fashions, pants and stuff. Oh, to repeat it, yes, very good. Thank you very much for calling that out. I hate when speakers don't do that when I'm in the audience. He asked if they're in that cold water. I mean, think how cold spring snowmelt is. And they didn't have waders and insulated clothing. How do they survive and stay in that? Some of them had pants they would just kind of take off, but a lot of them ended up wearing leggings and breech cloths so they could just take off their leggings and basically go in bare-legged so they can get out. It's insane, tougher than I am. I will say mountain men died. Hypothermia, drowned. Jacques Laramie was a very famous French mountain man who died here in Wyoming. Why is that name important? Everything named Laramie is named after that Frenchman. Yeah, after that French mountain man, the Fort Laramie, City of Laramie, School District of Laramie, the county, it's all named after Jacques. So he died in the Laramie River. By the way, if I die because of something, don't name the thing that killed me after me. That's some level of disrespect. Like, if I die in a river, don't be like, that's where Jeremy died. That's the Jeremy River. Disrespectful. Yeah. Now, luckily, they weren't swimming. They were going in, setting traps, and coming out. So they weren't like, having a beer. So I imagine speed was of the essence, but they did it. Yeah. Well, they didn't want to ruin, because that was their money. It's like making a suit out of clothing. Yeah. Most of them did not wear beaver hide clothing. They did use deer skins mainly, but it took so long to dry that they usually went in like they just took off their pants or took off their leggings. Yeah. They're not going to stop water from going through it. Like you could make bowls and stuff out of them, but you don't have waders in the bottom, Yeah. Yes, sir. They normally set traps near the lodges. Now people do all sorts of different things. I can't say that wasn't the normal mode of trapping. It was setting traps in the water near the lodges, not in the lodges, because it's hard to get in the lodge. The beavers had to come out to get food, so they just put them by the lodge. Yeah, well, it was really, really waterproof, they found. And so once they put those layers of why the beaver hat, why not other things? I'm sorry, you asked me and I forgot to do it the first time. Well, muskrat was used, very good. That was a poor man's beaver hat. And so if you couldn't afford beaver, you afforded muskrat or a mixture of beaver and muskrat. It's like, why do people want Chanel and not Walmart? You know, it's just, you know, we don't always make good decisions as humans. Yeah, exactly. Black, yeah, black or dark brown, but usually black. Not that I've seen. I've only seen black ones. Yeah. But well, once they go through the process, some beavers do get almost black, but yeah. Yeah. Well, great. Well, okay, one more. I don't know that modern grading system. But what I know basically is it was whether it was pure beaver or like prime was often used to describe whether it was like pure beaver or not. Also interesting when you're looking at historic beaver hats. Some of them also say whether they are a hatter of His Royal Majesty or Her Royal Majesty, depends before or after King Heights, whatever his name was. But that was another thing. Like if you got a hat from a hat that had a forget the word they used, but basically approved by the crown, they were also more expensive. This one I ended up getting was not, it'll say like, what's the word? If any of my historian friends remember the word. It's basically like a warrant of His Royal Majesty or Her Royal Majesty. Basically, you are approved for, because the nobility could only shop where it was approved to shop. And so once you got your hatter shop approved by Her Royal Majesty or his, then you were able to put that on there. So I'll be up here for a few minutes. If you guys have any other questions, I'll be up here, but I'm gonna let the general audience go. If you want to come up and look at stuff, I'll be up here as well, and you can look and touch at some of the stuff. I'll let you know what you can touch, what you can't. But thank you guys so much for hanging out with us today.